So Keir Starmer's proposing votes at 16. And look, I don't want to sound like a hypocrite, because if you go back far enough, you'll find me out campaigning for votes at 16 when I was 16. But I have changed my mind on that. Now let's have a little look at what happened across the European Union last week. We saw a sweeping of right-wing parties rejecting the globalist leftist narrative that has dominated politics for the last 20 years. And a massive contributing factor to that is that some of those countries, including France, Belgium and Greece, have lowered their voting ages to 16 and in some cases 17-year-olds who are now in the franchise. So what's the total outcome of that? Well, we found that 17% of them are voting for right-wing parties. So, with Keir Starmer planning to get more votes by gerrymandering the election to swing it towards the left, is that going to backfire in the long run? Have a little look at France, Keir, and maybe you'll think twice. Albie, what do you think of Keir Starmer's votes at 16 proposal?
I quite like the votes at 16 proposal. I've been in favour of it. But you mentioned before that 17% of people in the European elections, younger voters, voted for...
16 to 24, yeah.
16 to 24 voted for right-wing parties, which would mean that 83% didn't. So that would still suggest to me that actually it would be more advantageous to left-wing parties and Labour than it would be to someone like Reform. That is not to say there isn't a trend of seeing younger voters, particularly Gen Z voters, being more right-wing than their predecessors, particularly young men versus young women. But just the statistics you quoted would indicate to me that maybe it would be more beneficial to Keir Starmer than a hindrance to him.
So, Darren, you know, we've seen Nigel Farage get really big on places like TikTok. Reform also getting a lot of views. I saw a young lady go up to Nigel Farage at one of his conferences or speeches, and she said, you know, I was locked in a school, forced to sign a paper saying I was transphobic, and I couldn't believe it, so thank you, Nigel, for speaking up. Do you see that trend increasing under the Labour government?
Well, that was from Conservative Party conference last year, where he was sort of like, you know, he was like a deity of some nature. They were walking around, there's Messiah Farage. It was bizarre. Were you there?
I was there,
and so I think there is something going on there. I don't think he's wrong in saying that and recognising that on platforms which are full of overwhelming amounts of young people, primarily on TikTok, and I guess you could argue Instagram, or is that getting a bit old these days? I don't know.
Don't know.
Oh, I don't know.
Well, but there is something happening, and there is a real trend of people saying, and I think Albie's right to say young men, saying, actually, do you know what? I'm not sure I am better off than my parents, you know. I think actually I'm in a worse position.
No, they're definitely not.
Because of the housing situation. Now, I would argue that in large part that's thanks to migration, but also not building houses. So they're saying, I'm going to turn to the people that don't want a Benjamin Butterworth-type society.
I'm notwithstanding, I think Albie's point is still right, in that Keir Starmer just wants to do this because it will increase the vote on the left and they'll never be out of power. I just can't believe how we're even contemplating giving 16-year-olds, and believe me, I deal with them every day, they can barely speak in GP, but aside from that, they're not allowed to get married without permission. They're not allowed to leave school. They're not allowed to buy alcohol or cigarettes. It's a nonsense then to say, OK, you can vote. Are we going to lower the age for everything? Are we just going to dumb it all down and let them just go out?
Isn't that fascinating, though? Because whilst they're saying they can get the vote, literally a day before they won't be able to buy a Red Bull without ID. So surely those 16-year-olds and 15-year-olds are going to start rejecting that narrative and go, actually, even though you've given me the vote, I don't care. I want my rights back. And, of course, Benjamin, you're a huge fan of Nigel Farage and his immigration policies. How are you? Do you follow him on TikTok, Benjamin?
No, I don't use TikTok because I don't want the Chinese state in my phone.
Oh, I thought they already ran it. I thought they already paid your bills.
But, do you know, I went back to my old school this week, Wilmslow High School, and I went in. They have their mock election at the moment, and I went into the lunchtime meeting.
And they said, get out.
I went of their Reform UK party at the school, and it was fascinating. The Labour meeting was entirely female, and the Reform meeting was entirely male. And I was quite surprised. Now, these men were saying, these boys, should I say, were saying some slightly unpleasant things at times. And I think a lot of them loved Andrew Tate and Nigel Farage. Those were two names that kept coming up. I never imagined that my being cool would be that I work at the same place as Nigel Farage. Pretty implausible. So there's definitely a movement among boys, among young men, I think. That's true. But look, I looked at the polling. 4% of people under 24, 16 to 24, would vote Conservative, and 5% would vote reform, compared to more than half of them wanting to
I thought
vote
it was
Labour.
10% for both, but maybe not.
No, in fact, under 50, only 10% would vote Conservative. So, the idea that people have gone right-wing is complete nonsense.
But, this nanny state that the Tories and Labour have developed over the last 20 years, do you think that's going to backfire on the two major parties with young people in the long term?
I think the fact that the two major parties have really screwed over the younger generations in this country over the last 30 years is going to backfire on them massively. And Labour have one chance to sort it out. Otherwise, I do think we're going to start to see surges in right-wing populism, like in Europe, in the UK, with younger voters.